Picture a mother in 1764, standing at the doorway of her cottage in the French countryside, watching her 14-year-old daughter go down the path toward the pastures. It was the same walk the girl had made many times before, with the same morning mist lying across the valleys of Gevaudan. But Jean Bely would never return home. Her body was found a few hours later, her throat torn out, her skull crushed like an eggshell, and her head nearly severed from her body, left hanging by threads of flesh. The local priest refused to perform her last rites, not because of how she had died, but because of what had killed her. Over the following 3 years, something would slaughter more than 100 people across this remote province. Experienced wolf hunters, men who had killed thousands of wolves, stood frozen in disbelief when they saw the creature. It shrugged off musket balls, sometimes walked upright on its hind legs, and chose its victims with an intelligence that defied the natural order. And when King Louis XV's personal gunbearer finally shot what was claimed to be the beast and carried it to Versailles, the attacks did not stop. Instead, they became worse. What changed everything was the autopsy conducted in 1767. That report, lost for nearly 200 years, revealed human remains inside the stomach, surgical scars across the body, marks on the neck as if it had once worn a collar, and teeth filed into unnatural shapes. This was not simply a curiosity of history. It was the terror that brought a whole province, and almost an entire nation, to its knees, created by something that was never supposed to exist. To understand it, we must return to the summer of 1764, to a remote land that was about to become the center of France's darkest nightmare. Gevaudan was not only isolated, it was a place where medieval times had not fully disappeared. Thick forests spread across the land, broken only by scattered villages where perhaps 50 souls clung together for survival. There were no proper roads, no regular patrols, only farmers, shepherds, and their children trying to live on rocky soil while wolves howled in the distance. The 7 Years' War had just ended, leaving France drained of both men and money. The young people who survived were often left alone in the fields with livestock, unprotected and vulnerable, perfect prey for a predator. But the locals knew wolves. Every farmer could explain how they hunted, how they moved, and how to drive them away. Wolves were simply part of life, like storms or bad harvests. So when in April 1764 a young woman tending cattle reported being attacked by something like a wolf, but not a wolf, her account was dismissed. Her herd had driven the creature off. She was thought to be frightened or mistaken. Then came June 30th, and the mutilated body of Jean Bely. The parish register later recorded something unprecedented. The priest wrote that she had been killed by the ferocious beast. Not a wolf, not an animal, but la bête, the beast. As if there could only be one, as though everyone already understood what was meant. Within weeks, the attacks spread violently across the region. But these were not ordinary predator killings. The beast was not consuming its victims, at least not completely. It was destroying them. Bodies were discovered with heads twisted backward, faces ripped entirely away, throats not just bitten but hollowed out. One survivor, a young boy, described how he saw the creature kill his friend. It placed its paws upon the boy's shoulders, almost gently, before opening its mouth wider than any wolf could and swallowing his entire head inside. By September, 7 were dead. By October, 12. The beast appeared everywhere at once, striking in broad daylight, in different places, sometimes even on the same day miles apart. It showed no fear of people, no behavior of a normal animal. When groups of children tried to fight it with sticks and stones, it would sit just beyond their reach, staring with what survivors called eyes like burning coals, waiting for one to fall away from the rest. Its appearance defied any known category. Yet every witness agreed on certain features that made no sense together. Its body was as large as a calf or a young bull, far bigger than a wolf. The fur was reddish-brown with a black stripe along its spine, resembling a hyena's mane. The head was massive but unnatural, stretched like that of a greyhound but with a snout compared by witnesses to a calf's, broad and flat. Its tail was the strangest part, longer than that of a wolf, thick as a man's arm, with a tuft at the end said to knock grown adults off their feet. But it was the way it moved that truly spread terror. People described it leaping across fields in bounds of 20 feet or more, its hind legs driving it with unnatural strength. One shepherd swore it cleared a stone wall 7 feet high without slowing at all. Another claimed he saw it rise on its hind legs, balanced perfectly, using its forepaws to test door latches. Captain Jean-Baptiste Duhamel, the military officer assigned to investigate, wrote to his commanders in near panic. It has a chest as broad as a horse, a body as long as a leopard, red fur with a black stripe. Surely you will think as I do, this is a monster whose father must be a lion. What its mother was remained unknown. The local response was sheer panic. Farmers abandoned their fields. By the spring of 1765, people reported seeing it kill cattle with little effort. It started entering villages even in daylight. One afternoon, it walked through the center of a hamlet, ignoring the terrified residents as they fled, and attacked a child playing in a doorway while his mother watched helplessly from inside, frozen with fear. Then came Marie-Jeanne Vallée. On August 11, 1765, the 20-year-old was crossing a stream with her sister near Paulhac when the beast leapt from the brush. But Vallée carried a crude spear, a bayonet fixed to the end of a pole. As its jaws opened wide to swallow her head, she drove the blade deep into its chest. The beast screamed. Witnesses said the sound was unlike any animal they had ever known, and it retreated, leaving behind a trail of blood. François Antoine, the king's own gun-bearer, who had just assumed command of the hunt, personally examined the site. He found Vallée's blade still wet with blood and tracks unlike those of any wolf he had ever seen. Struck by her bravery, he wrote to Versailles comparing her to Joan of Arc. She became known as the Maid of Gevaudan, and today a statue remembers the moment when a peasant girl wounded a creature that armies could not capture. Antoine was 71 years old, but he was perhaps the greatest hunter in France. Calm and deliberate where others had been reckless, he studied the beast's movements, its favorite hunting grounds, and the phases of the moon when it struck. On September 21, 1765, he was prepared. In the forest near the Abbey of Chazes, Antoine and his nephew confronted a massive wolf. It stood 32 inches at the shoulder, enormous for a European wolf, and measured 5 feet 7 inches from nose to tail. It weighed 130 pounds. Antoine fired into its head with a musket loaded with 5 bullets. When survivors were brought to see the body, several recognized wounds they had inflicted in earlier battles. A woman pointed to a scar on the shoulder, where she had once struck it with a pitchfork. A boy identified a missing toe he himself had cut off with a sickle. Surely this had to be the beast. Antoine had the wolf preserved and sent to Versailles, where it was shown before the royal court. The king proclaimed the victory his own. Antoine was awarded more than 9,000 livres in rewards and granted a lifelong pension. The nightmare seemed finished, but it was not. On December 2, 1765, only 2 months after Antoine's success, 2 boys were attacked near La Beyssière-Sainte-Marie. The elder managed to fight the creature off and saved his younger brother. The beast had returned, or perhaps it had never gone. These new attacks revealed a creature that had learned from its encounters. It no longer lingered after a failed strike. It avoided open ground where hunters might be waiting. It attacked quickly and disappeared. Some witnesses thought it behaved more cautiously around people now, as if it remembered the spear of Marie-Jeanne Vallée. But the king refused to admit that the killings had resumed. To acknowledge them would mean confessing that his celebrated triumph had been false. Newspapers were discouraged from reporting events in Gevaudan. Officially, the beast was dead. Unofficially, people kept dying. Abandoned by the crown, local officials attempted increasingly desperate measures. Etienne Lafont, the regional administrator, suggested leaving poisoned dog carcasses in the areas where the beast hunted. The young Marquis d'Apcher organized armed civilian patrols. Pilgrimages and prayers increased. The Bishop of Mende had already declared the beast to be divine punishment for sin, and now people believed God had sent it back because their repentance was not enough. Throughout 1766, the killings continued sporadically. The beast appeared more wary, but just as deadly. Parents sometimes found the bodies of their children arranged almost like ceremonies. Heads placed apart from torsos, organs carefully removed and laid out in deliberate patterns, almost as if to send a message. By the spring of 1767, despair had turned into resignation. The beast was now accepted as part of life, like famine or plague. Children made rhymes about it. Mothers used its name to frighten misbehaving toddlers. Even the economy began to adapt. Shepherds began to work in groups. Markets adjusted their hours to make use of daylight, and strangers were treated with suspicion, in case the beast might walk in human form. Then came June 19, 1767. Jean Chastel was a local farmer and hunter, 60 years old, who had been part of the hunts since the beginning. Some said he was eccentric, a solitary man who knew the forest too well. He had even spent time in jail in 1765, accused of misleading Antoine's search. But on this day, he joined a hunting party led by the Marquis d'Apcher in the woods of Mount Mouchet. The different accounts of what followed vary in detail, but all agree on the strange nature of it. Chastel had placed himself in a forest clearing, reading from a prayer book. Some say it was the litanies of the Virgin. The beast came out of the trees and, according to those who saw it, stopped. It stared at Chastel. It did not charge, it did not flee, it only stood as if waiting. Chastel calmly finished his prayer, closed the book, raised his musket, and fired a single shot. The beast dropped dead. An autopsy was immediately carried out by Dr. Boulanger of Sorgues and recorded by Notary Rochetti and Marin, revealing horrifying remains inside its stomach. The collarbone of a young woman, fragments of a child's femur, and pieces of clothing were found. Yet there was something else, a note in the report almost mentioned in passing, but it changed everything. The creature had 42 teeth, the absolute maximum for any canine, but arranged in a way that did not match any known species. Inside its stomach were not only human remains, but traces that suggested feeding by human hands. Worked leather, bits of prepared meat, even what looked like bread. When the body was examined further, scars were discovered across it in patterns that seemed less like wounds from battle and more like deliberate surgical changes. Double dew claws on the hind legs, a trait of some domestic dogs, but never found in wolves. And around its neck, so faint they were almost missed, were marks showing it had once worn a collar, thick and meant for control. Chastel wanted to bring the carcass to the king to claim reward and fame. He roughly preserved the body with straw and began his journey to Versailles. But summer heat ruined the preservation. By the time he reached Paris, the corpse smelled so badly that nobles fled from the chamber. The famous naturalist Comte de Buffon was ordered to inspect it. His verdict was brief and dismissive. A large wolf, nothing more. The remains were quickly buried in a nobleman's garden. There was no reward for Chastel. No recognition from the king. Only 72 livres granted by the local authorities, and then he faded back into obscurity. But the killings ended. Entirely. Not a single death after June 19, 1767. The official version formed quickly. The Beast of Gévaudan had been nothing more than a wolf, perhaps 2 wolves, maybe even a small pack. Exaggeration and superstition had turned ordinary predation into a legend. Case closed. Time to move on. But the evidence points to a different truth. Let us look at what is actually known versus what we are told. First, the death toll. Official accounts admitted to at least 80 dead, but parish records suggest over 100, with another 150 injured. Some estimates climb as high as 124 killed and 300 wounded. These numbers are far beyond normal wolf attacks. Jean-Marc Morisseau, who catalogued wolf attacks in France from 1500 to 1800, recorded about 9,000 deaths in total over 3 centuries. The Beast of Gévaudan claimed more lives in just 3 years than most wolf populations do in decades. Second, its behavior. Wolves are opportunistic hunters, preferring weak or vulnerable prey, and they usually avoid humans unless starving or rabid. This creature deliberately targeted humans while ignoring easier prey. It struck in daylight, entered villages, and showed a kind of tactical cunning. When children formed groups to defend themselves after the Portefeuille incident, the beast shifted to attacking adults. When hunters set female wolves as decoys, it ignored them. When poisoned carcasses were laid out, it refused to touch them. Third, the physical descriptions. Every single witness, hundreds of them, reported an animal that did not resemble a wolf. The size alone was wrong. European wolves rarely weigh more than 100 pounds. Yet this creature was repeatedly described as the size of a calf. Its coloring was wrong. Wolves do not carry black stripes along their backs. And the tail was wrong as well. Witnesses described the tail as longer than a wolf's and even able to be used like a weapon. The head was not right either, broad and flat rather than pointed and narrow. Modern researchers have offered several explanations. Biologist Carl Hans Take argues the descriptions match almost exactly a subadult male lion. The tawny coat, the dark mane stripe young males grow, the long tufted tail, the ability to leap extraordinary distances, the size. Lions are also known to turn into man-eaters under the right conditions. But how could a lion appear in rural France? And why would no one recognize it? Others put forward the striped hyena theory, pointing to engravings of the period that labeled the beast as a hyen. Hyenas have the high ridge of hair along the back, the crushing jaws that could inflict the wounds reported, and would have been utterly foreign to French villagers. Yet striped hyenas are rarely man-eaters, and again, how would one get there? The most fascinating explanation involves deliberate human influence. The scars on the beast's body, the marks on its neck, the traces of domestic dog traits, and even the fact it seemed to recognize Chastel all point to training. Some scholars suggest the creature was man-made, a hybrid created by crossing a wolf with a mastiff or another large dog, then trained to kill. The worked leather and cooked food in its stomach support the theory. But if so, who did it and why? The timing is suggestive. The attacks began just as France was reeling from the 7 Years' War, a disastrous loss that had stripped the monarchy of prestige. Suddenly, a crisis arose that gave the king a chance to look like a savior, to rally the nation against a shared enemy, to display royal authority by defeating a monster. When Antoine killed his wolf and the attacks went on, the crown simply denied the truth rather than admit defeat. Some historians think the beast may have been rural terrorism, perhaps tied to religious conflict between Catholics and the Huguenots who still lived in isolated areas. Others believe it was an organized criminal scheme. Kill villagers, blame a creature, and plunder the corpses and abandoned farms. The most bizarre theory comes from the surgical modifications. In the 18th century, some aristocrats were fascinated with creating strange hunting spectacles. What if someone, maybe even linked to the royal court, bred or engineered the perfect predator? Released it into a remote province to stir fear? And when it grew too dangerous, arranged its destruction. That would explain why Antoine's wolf was not the true beast, but only a decoy to let the king declare victory. It would explain why Chastel, a little-known farmer, succeeded where soldiers and hunters had failed. Perhaps he was part of the scheme. It would explain why the beast appeared to know him, why it stood still as he fired, why he showed no fear in front of it. The Marin autopsy report, rediscovered in 1952, holds another chilling detail. When describing the teeth, Marin noted they were worn in a way that suggested filing. Filed teeth serve no natural purpose, but they do make wounds distinctive, unmistakable, and terrifying. They would make a monster. We will never know the full truth. The remains are gone, buried long ago in some Parisian garden. The witnesses are long gone. The royal archives that may once have contained crucial documents were destroyed during the Revolution. What remains are fragments, testimonies, and questions that only multiply the deeper we search. But think about this. In 1766, while the beast was still attacking but declared dead, a traveling menagerie toured southern France. Its main attraction was a trained wolf that performed tricks for crowds. The showman claimed he had captured and tamed it himself. He demonstrated how it followed commands, how it could be ordered to attack stuffed figures on cue. His name has been lost, but local records reveal he suddenly left the region in early 1767, only months before Chastel shot the beast. He abandoned his menagerie, leaving behind the performing wolf, which was later found dead in its cage. When officials examined the body, they discovered something strange. Surgical scars across its frame, and deep marks around its neck from years of wearing a heavy collar, exactly like the descriptions of the beast. The French government has never officially admitted any plot or deception concerning the Beast of Gévaudan. The accepted story remains unchanged. Mass panic exaggerated wolf attacks into a legend. Yet certain files in the French National Archives remain sealed. Requests to see them are consistently refused on grounds of historical sensitivity. But what could possibly be sensitive about wolf attacks from over 260 years ago? In 2016, a French researcher claimed he briefly glimpsed one of these restricted files before it was taken away. He read only a few lines, but they were shocking. It was a letter from François Antoine to an unnamed contact at Versailles, dated October 1765, after he supposedly killed the beast. The letter began, "The theatrical performance proceeds as planned. The substitute has been displayed to great effect regarding the original specimen." That was all he managed to read before the document was seized. The Beast of Gévaudan claimed its final victim on June 18, 1767, 19-year-old Jean Bastide. She was found in a field, her head nearly severed, her body partially consumed. The very next day, Jean Chastel ended the nightmare with a single shot. The timing feels almost staged. One last victim to remind everyone of the horror, then a dramatic resolution. Whether the beast was a wolf, a hybrid, or something intentionally created, the true terror lies not in the creature itself. It is the fact that someone, somewhere, knew exactly what it was, and they still remain silent.